Hi class. This chapter is chapter 11, motivation and emotion. Again, just an introduction video to the chapter. It is a jam-packed chapter. It's comparable to the chapter on human development. A lot of information in a short amount of time. So as I go through this, I'm going to just hit the highlights. There'll be chunks that are not really discussed. It's just an introduction to the chapter anyways. But it's just a lot of information. It's such an interesting chapter. The first half is motivation, the second half is emotion, and so we'll just delve into it now. Let me go over some definitions that are important. Again, if you see me glancing over, I'm just looking at my notes over here. Motivation, just some definition. Motivation is the urge to move towards one's goal, whatever they may be, made up of three components: needs, drives, and incentives. Let's take a look at those. So a need is an inherently biological state of deficiency. A drive is a perceived state of tension when our bodies are deficient in some need. And I'm going to give you an example of this in a minute. An incentive is usually an external object or event that motivates behavior. So there's different models of motivation the text talks about. The first one is the drive reduction model. This is primarily used, best illustrated with physiological systems. For example, our body has what they call homeostasis. There's a place where we have a balance. We can be in our weight, it can be in our eating, the food that we take in. Probably the best example that all of us have experienced, especially if you've ever swam, is being out of air. And so what happens when you swim, and I swim a lot, it's kind of part of my life activities. Twice a week I'm in the pool, twice a week I'm on the bike, so you kind of been doing that for a lot of years, decades actually, so it's been a long time. But anyway, so when you're swimming, what happens when you swim underneath the water, and this is what I'll ask a student in my class, what happens when you dive underneath the water? Can you just keep on swimming forever and forever? No, because what happens is eventually you come to a place where you have a deficiency, right? There's a deficiency in your body. And then there's a need, and that is for oxygen. And so you come back up to the surface and you get air. That's an example of this physiological balance of homeostasis. And we see the same thing with individuals that are gaining weight or losing weight. There's really a balance to where your body should be and where it feels comfortable. So that's the first one, drive reduction model. Then we have the optimal arousal model. And this is where humans are motivated to be situations that are neither too stimulating or not stimulating enough. And what I do in the class is I address John C. Lilly. He's not really in the book very much, but he was. They had a film called Day of the Dolphins about him. But one of the things that he did do, he was a protege of Timothy Leary, who definitely had some challenges. But John C. Lilly studied isolation, and what he found is that he would put people in tanks, and where they couldn't hear, they couldn't see, they were like in this floating, kind of like a saltwater gel type thing, so you never really hit the ground or anything, and he'd be in these isolation tanks. What he found is that individuals did not do well in that isolation for very long. So when it's not too stimulating, it's problematic, but when it's overstimulating, it can be also problematic. And an example of that would be, go down here, is Yerkes-Dodson's law. So Yerkes-Dodson talks about optimal arousal. You've heard of people say you're in the zone. Well, what that means is that you're not too aroused and you're not under aroused. You're just in that right amount of physiological arousal to accomplish a task. Think of an example of when you come home trying to get into your house. Say if you're really, really tired, it's kind of hard to put the key in the keyhole, get it in there to open up the door. At the same time, if you're rushing into the house, say there's a bad guy coming after you, you're going to have the same problem. That's an example of both extremes. The best time is when, I need to get in the car, I need to get in the house, got to do something, but I'm not too excited, I'm not too tired, boom, right away. That's probably the best example of Yerkes-Dodson's law. Let's see what else we got here. Evolutionary model, they would say that motivation, and again, that's what we're looking at here, is models of motivation, is basically just to survive and reproduce. That's their contention. So everything we do, what motivates our behavior, is to survive ourselves and to replicate our species. Then we have the hierarchical model, And this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's kind of a cool. I like it. I kind of like it. He says there's 5 stages in his model. Five stages that you go up through. The lowest is the physiological needs. Those are your basic needs. So hunger, water, air, those type of things. Once those needs are met, then you're concerned about safety. Am I safe? Once those needs are met, then you're concerned about love and belonging. How's my relationships going? And then my self-esteem, my global self-worth. And the last thing is self-actualization. Now, Maslow would say, let me just have a sip of water here, guys. Maslow would say that very few people self-actualize. Since that time, though, the model has been not really altered, but the explanation has been elaborated, and most people will self-actualize maybe even daily when they accomplish a goal that they had for that particular day. It's like, wow, I've done this. Most people will self-actualize. There is that component of it. But Maslow was kind of hesitant with that. Then, in the same bent, looking at motivation, 2 basic drives, the text looks at hunger and sex. Those are the 2 major drives that the text discusses. First is hunger, the rate at which we consume energy is called metabolism. It's a product of biological processes interacting with external and environmental ones. And so let's take a look at the biology of when we eat. There are internal signals. And usually what I do is I'll start out the class and I'll ask somebody, when was the last time you were hungry? How did you know it? And they'll say, well, my stomach was growling and making noises, that type of thing. And so then I will ask them, do you think if you didn't have a stomach, would you still be hungry? And most students will say, probably not, I would imagine not. But in fact, what we know is that individuals that have had stomach cancer, that have had their stomachs removed, are still hungry. And so we know there's different components besides just our stomach associated with hunger. Certainly the stomach is part of it. Stomach gastric secretions activated by the brain when we think, or smell food. So when you walk by In-N-Out Burger, you're smelling that beef, it's like, it smells pretty good. That's what occurs. Blood is another factor, simple sugars in the blood that provides energy for cells. What we know is that the brain, as well as a factor, damages to the hypothalamus, damages to the ventral medial part of the hypothalamus, if I remember correctly. It's the front part of the hypothalamus. If that is damaged, then it may be it's the opposite. I can't recall off the top of my head. But there's different parts of the hypothalamus. If one part is damaged, then your tendency to overeat. Another part is damaged, you have no desire to eat. Hormones and neurochemicals, some stimulate, some suppress. Those are another factors that associate with hunger. Once it's stimulated, it's neuropeptide, ghrelin, endocannabinoids. Same thing they find in cannabis, associated with what they used to call the munchies for people that were smoking marijuana. And there are also neurotransmitters that suppress. Insulin, leptin are ones that suppress. So that's the physiological components of when we eat. The psychology of what we eat are external factors, smells and cultural preferences. Like, for example, my wife is Chinese, and part of their diet is kind of like a delicacy, is a pig's brain. And they used to eat it during times of taking tests. They felt like from a Chinese traditional medicine that would make them do better on the test, because pigs are pretty smart animals. I'm not so sure about how it worked out, but it's something that they're fine with eating. Me, I'm probably not going to go for a pig's brain. You go past that break. We do know that the psychology of what we eat, multiple exposures increase our preference. And so if you want your child to eat vegetables, make sure you expose them to a lot of vegetables during their early childhood, and they're more likely to be in that direction. Find broccoli and carrots and celery delicious. We do know we have this motivation to be thin towards it, even though we have a tendency towards obesity society. A third of our society is obese, a third is overweight, and a third is normal weight. So we have that motivation that's moving us towards that, even though we desire to be thin. Nature versus nurture, when we look at it, we know that genes are responsible for about 70% of our adult weight. 30% is environment. But with that said, does that mean somebody who has got the predisposition towards obesity is going to be obese always? What we find is that it's not necessarily true. Dieting, while dieting is certainly is healthy for you, obesity being not so good, what we know is that when you diet, you don't get rid of fat cells, you just shrink them. And so what happens is that individuals go on these really crazy diets where they're losing, they're eating just grapefruit or something bizarre like that. What we find is that those individuals are more likely to lose a lot of weight, but when they stop their diet, they're going to come back with a vengeance. And so what happens, those fat cells shrink, but now the body's thinking, I can't trust you. And so when you eat something, it like poofs out twice the size as it was before because it just doesn't know when you're going to go crazy and do something wild. So what I always encourage clients of mine that are wanting to lose weight is eat healthy. Don't be so concerned about your weight as much as your health. And your weight is going to come into line with that. Let's see what else we got here. Eating disorders, they talk about anorexia and bulimia nervosa. Both are anorexia nervosa is very dangerous. Bulimia nervosa is no picnic either. But anorexia nervosa, you're more likely to die from that. Let's go over. And then sex and survival of species. I'm running out of time here, guys, so I'm going quickly. Masters and Johnson were the first scientists to study the sexual response. They said that men and women go through 4 phases: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. A lot of studies about what causes our sexual orientation, nature versus nurture. Most of the research, kind of the crux of it, is that it's based off of exposure to testosterone in utero. Massive exposure to testosterone in utero is probably, from the research is showing, the predicator that makes males attracted to females, and lower exposures of testosterone in utero is what makes females more attracted to males. So we see that kind of a process occurring. Going quickly, guys. I'm already running out of time here. Bear with me here. Next is need to belong to excel. I'm just going to quickly go through this. Affiliation, very, very important. What we find is that individuals that feel isolated from belonging are more likely to experience depression, more likely to experience despair. We see in these mass shootings that are occurring almost without exception, there is that isolation that is a factor there. And just as a side note, the rejection, when you feel rejection from a broken relationship, that pain you feel, that's real pain. That the same part of the brain that's lit up when somebody steps on your toe, that's lit up when you have an emotional breakup as well. So it is real physical pain. So take 2 aspirins, call me in the morning might work for a breakup as well. Need to excel, achievement. There's Atkinson's achievement model. He says motivation is the desire to do things well and overcome difficulties and obstacles to achieve success. There's 3 things. There's a motivation to succeed, expectation of success, and incentive value of success. There is also emotion. There are types. I'm going through this, trying to find the highlights that I want to talk about. 2 major types of emotions. There's basic emotions like common to all: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, and sadness. They would say emotions are an evolutionary adaptation, bringing our physiological systems together. Emotion is also a process. Lazarus has got an example of that in your text, where we see there's an antecedent. Let me just see the book here real quick. There's an antecedent, there we have praise the antecedent, then we have an emotional response, and then there is either physiological, behavioral, or subjective changes that occur. Then we reassess the danger. So if you see somebody walking down a dark alley, it's like, well, it's spooky. You think, oh, wow, this is scary. And then you recognize a person. It's like, okay, it's somebody I know in class. But then, and so you reassess it. I'm calm. And then you realize, wow, they have a knife on their hand, it's dripping with blood, so you reassess it, you freak out again. So that's with Lazarus. He says emotion is a process. They talk about facial expressions of emotions. Sylvan Tompkins confirmed Darwin's assertion that people and animals display emotions through their face and body. What he did is he did a study, and he found that our facial expressions are universal. Through indigenous cultures that have maybe limited communications, they see a smile, they know it's somebody who's happy. In fact, babies that are born blind smile, and so we know that it's this kind of this inborn component of us. I think that is it, guys. It's an interesting chapter. It's jam-packed full of information. Oh, the last thing I do want to talk about is Goleman's emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman wrote this book. It was back in the might have been early 2000s, late 1990s, called Emotional Intelligence. And what he said is that our ability to understand others' emotions is as important, and he would say was even more important than our intelligence, our IQ. In navigating through the world. So I hope this introduction helps a little bit for you to get started in the chapter. Again, I just really fast-paced just because I want to kind of limit my time frames here for my video clips. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a little bit.